Welcome everybody from across Canada to our by name list coordinated access community of practice series of webinars. We try to do these on a regular basis. We also have by name list and coordinated access webinars that we do on a regular basis. So just to provide a brief explanation of what that means, we see a difference between webinars and community of practice. So a webinar is something where we, either someone from the Canadian Alliance or someone that we invite in as a presenter, will provide essentially an hour's worth of content and fantastic information and learning. And if there is time and opportunity for Q&A, then we'll do that within those. Community of practice, however, is slightly different. We see a community of practice call as an opportunity to interact with one another in terms of learning, sharing, making you, the participants, the experts. However, that being said, we feel it's important to always provide some initial context just to get the blood flowing in your head, get you thinking about things, and stirring up questions and comments, maybe challenges that you might want to throw out there to us, questions you might want to ask the rest of the participants on the call, and so forth. So our purpose is to make sure that in one way or another you're provided with some brief information up front, probably 15 minutes or so of some content. And then we're really hoping that we can encourage you and cajole you and otherwise threaten you into participating and sharing and talking. And so the topic today is prioritization. And again, because this is not a webinar, then it's going to be a little bit different regarding prioritization. So I'll explain that to you in a few minutes. But to get things moving forward, I want to start off and I want to just make sure that you understand the functionality. Somewhere on your screen, you should see something similar to this. You have the chat and you have the Q&A. And to start off with the chat, what we'd like to reserve that for is for any comments that you want to make to the general group, just comments, nothing that you necessarily need to be addressed, but anything you want to share. If you want to say hi to somebody, or even if you want to send them a private message in the chat just to tell them about, you know, how horrible your coffee was this morning or whatever the case might be, do all of that through the chat. If there is, however, something that you want to talk about and have brought out into the discussion, what we would ask is that you would post those kinds of questions or comments into the Q&A feature. And that way we can kind of know the difference, and it helps us to monitor things more appropriately and effectively and know what we want to bring out. And so if you do something, put something in the Q&A, however, be forewarned that that may mean that we might unmute you and ask you to share your comments openly. If you don't want to, and you know that up front, maybe just put that in at the end of your comment, and then we'll just throw it out there and we'll talk about it and banter it on and so forth. But otherwise, keep the Q&A functionality reserved for things that you want to say out loud and have discussion about or ask a question about. So I hope that makes sense. We always start off with just a refresher quickly about the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness. You've seen this slide, most of you, many times, so I'm not going to belabor it. These are the things that we do. This is who we are. We keep growing, and that section of elements at the bottom of that slide seems to be growing all the time. But this is who we are right now. Feel free to click on any of those to get further information and an understanding of what those are all about. If you go to cah.ca, you will see those, and you can do that. Now, one slide I forgot to put in that I'm going to speak to is that this work that we're doing is in part funded by the federal government. And so we are, through the Reaching Home initiative, and we are forever grateful that we have this opportunity through them to provide training and technical assistance and support to the folks across Canada. And so shout out to the feds. And they don't probably get a lot of shout outs, so it's good that we do that once in a while. The training and technical assistance mission is helping communities and organizations end homelessness with expert training and technical assistance. And so that's our goal today, is to provide you with some a venue, an avenue for getting some additional assistance, or having a platform where you can talk about things that will help you. So now, again, before I go to the next slide, I just wanted to say that our plan today is, even though the topic is prioritization, we are not giving you a full-blown sort of prioritization training. We are going to talk about some very high-level principles and elements of prioritization at the start, and it's going to be brief. And then we're going to ask you some questions, and we're going to prompt you with some things to think about and get talking about prioritization. And we want this to be about you helping each other, as I said earlier. So let's get started with the information we have prepared. So initially, again, from the Reaching Home Coordinated Access Guide, the purpose of prioritization is to have a clear process. Sorry, I got to move Quinn and Jody out of the way. Clear process that helps communities to reach their goals. The prioritization criteria that a community chooses determines a client's position on the waiting list. And I will say that if you read the guide, it doesn't say position. It says rank. And I changed it for this presentation to position because I don't like the word rank. But anyway, client's position on the waiting list for housing resources, or the priority list, if you will, which I also like better than waiting list. Using information gathered through triage and assessment. Now, I wanted to add to this something that I actually really like that Ian DeYoung from OrgCode says about prioritization. And he says it's the process and action of deciding the relative importance and urgency of serving a particular household ahead of another based on transparent and defensible criteria. Okay? So think about that. What does that mean? Transparent and actually more so defensible criteria. So why do we prioritize? Well, first of all, we prioritize because we operate from a housing first based philosophy in this work, and it should not be on a first come, first served basis. We do not serve individuals in our work, especially when we have a focus, and from a Reaching Home perspective, a focus on the chronically homeless. It cannot be done effectively from a first come, first served basis. That is why so many of the individuals experiencing homelessness have been left in their current predicament for so long, is because that's the way the typical systems have operated. And then those individuals, because of their complexities and challenges, have not had the abilities or capacity at certain times in their lives to be the first come, first served individual. And so they have continually been sort of pushed aside. And so in order to really effectively help individuals, we have to be able to prioritize based on, as it says in the second bullet, or to triage based on service needs and high levels of vulnerability and so forth. We also prioritize so that we can effectively match people to the appropriate and available resources based on known eligibility criteria of those resources. So what does that mean then? There's sort of a sidebar to that, and we'll get to that in a minute. We prioritize to identify and address priority populations. So you not only have priority individuals, but you also have subpopulations within your communities that that you may or may not be thinking about prioritizing. Those might be, you know, for some communities, like in my own community, the Indigenous population is a priority population because 75% of our homeless individuals in my community are Indigenous. And so it makes sense that that population be a priority population. And so if you have a priority population, what does that mean in how we move forward? It helps to identify and to inform your by name list all the way down to the priority list. And what does that priority list mean? That means those are the people who are most likely able to be matched or to be able to agree to offerings of supports and services related to housing and so forth. A lot of that is based on, whether they are sometimes what's referred to as document ready, meaning they have everything in place that would allow them to move into permanent residence without any delays. And we also prioritize to ensure a system-wide sense of equity for who we provide resources to. So it's not just one group of people that are deciding this. It allows us to take all of the players in the system game. I shouldn't use that word, not game, but in the system. And everyone then is aware and clear and agreeing upon who is, or the order of that priority list, so that there aren't any arguments or disagreements and the criteria is known and clear to everyone. So what all this means is actually we have to be able to do some extensive system mapping in order for that to occur. If you're going to know criteria, eligibility criteria of supports and services, if you're going to know what supports and services are involved and who you can match to, all of those things, all of that, you can't do that unless you've done that mapping process and you understand the players and you understand the pathways that have existed and what's wrong with them and what needs to be fixed. So service mapping is an important component to be able to effectively prioritize. What is prioritized? Well, we look again at complexity of individuals experiencing homelessness. And each community themselves can determine what complexity really means. Because I think that it's important to think about what elements come into play when we determine what makes someone more complex over another. And, I think we have to be careful about how we do that, but complexity is important to consider. We prioritize, as I said, subpopulations within your community. And we have to remember that all subpopulations would have different criteria for various supports that are available. You might also prioritize things like unsheltered versus sheltered individuals in your community. You might be considering that the medically frail are those who need to be prioritized over someone else. We prioritize frequent service users sometimes. Those are examples of different criteria that would come into play in your prioritization efforts. You might think about other kinds of things that would determine, all come together and are all elements that you use to help define and determine, and as you check the different things off for each person, it should help to narrow down who is at the top of that list. So when we look at the process of prioritization, we're looking at a consensus for establishing community priorities. So your community has to come to consensus. This can't be a single organization or the CE on its own or whatever the case is. It has to be community consensus or system consensus to determine what those priorities are. We have to be able to decide what makes someone more vulnerable or a priority over another, and how do subpopulation priorities fit with overall community priorities. And for that to occur and transpire, we have to know what our housing resources are that are out there. We have to understand what resources are at the table, at the coordinated access table, so that we can determine what we can refer people to, what we can match people to. Some other requirements to consider. A lot of it revolves around policy, but we have to go through, the prioritization process has to go through the coordinated access process. And the point of that is it removes side doors. So we don't have people entering someone into their organization before they've gone through this process, which can circumvent the overarching process of determining how someone is prioritized or not. And the individuals have to be on your by name list, and we have to be having contact with them. And then when we get into other policies, we have to have a policy regarding the criteria and processes. If policies aren't in place, your system can go awry. And I've seen examples of this, even just from a program operational perspective, where without policies and procedures in place, new leadership tends to change the entire process. And so therefore, policies help your process stay consistent. There needs to be policy for situations where people do not agree with the process or what resources they've been matched to. When I say people, I'm talking mostly about the participants, but sometimes we have organizations that are part of your coordinated access system that also don't agree with the decisions that have been made. So do you have a policy to deal with that? And do you have a policy for those that the prioritization process is not working for, people that fall into some gaps? And if you've identified those, what is the process for that, or the policy for that? And you have to have a process beyond just an assessment score for finalizing priority and matching. So there needs to be an element of discussion and consensus amongst people who have been determined to play that role. And that decision is made, because just an assessment isn't going to be enough. There are so many other factors that need to come into play. So with that being said, that's as far as I'm going to go. Now I'm going to ask Quinn and Jody if they would have anything that they would add that they think needs to be thrown in here at the moment before I sort of throw out some other questions and thoughts to kind of get the blood flowing even more with people. But do either of you have anything you want to throw in here?
I think the only thing that I was going to add is, and you've said it, but I just want to underscore it again, that procedure piece is so vital. The policy it has to be there, but the how, the way that people play that out in a consistent manner is absolutely vital. So what can sometimes happen is that the policy is written, but there's no procedure behind it to actually give folks a clue about how to enact it. And that, I can't underscore that enough.
Yeah, it kind of becomes,
and further to that, oh, go ahead.
I was just going to say, it kind of becomes the terms of reference, like any other terms of reference. Then the group involved, so all the people at the coordinated access table have said, okay, we agree with this. And so it eliminates so many other challenges and problems.
Yeah.
Quinn?
Yeah, in regards to procedure too, I would challenge people as they're working through those kinds of situations to be user-focused in a big way as you're thinking through these things. Often, the temptation is to create a very good system to manage, rather than a very good system to use. And if the individual practitioners don't, that will be using your prioritization list and don't buy in and find it helpful and valuable and easy to use, you're going to find yourself having a lot of headaches that you could do without.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you. So as we move into sort of this next portion of things, I'm gonna throw out a couple of ideas. I see that we have one question in the Q&A function already. But what I want to do is just say to people that your questions, I hope, are not going to be thought of by everyone in this webinar as questions that are just for the three of us to answer. They are questions that anyone on the call can answer. And so if you believe that you have a response that you'd like to share to someone's question, then please feel free to let us know, raise your hand, whatever. And we want to create conversation here. We want to create discussion. This is not meant to be Canadian Alliance or the Jody, Quinn, and Wally show. This is meant to be your opportunity to be able to share and work with each other. So before we get to the first question, I want to just throw some things out there for you. because there is so much more to prioritization, so many more details and logistics and things that come into play when you actually go through the process of determining priority and criteria and all of that stuff, which we didn't get into, and that wasn't the point of today. I want you to be thinking about and to hopefully speak to, what are the challenges that we have already faced as we try to develop prioritization criteria or processes or policies? What seems to be, if we haven't developed them yet, what seems to be some of the barriers that are making it difficult for us? And what are some of the things that we have done in our community that have actually helped us overcome various hurdles, and that we feel are good practice that we could share, that you could share with others here? But what are the challenges that you think are associated with it? And I think that speaks to the first question. Quinn or Jody, if one of you want to.
Yeah, the question is from Nagina, and it is, what happens if you can't match someone because of their health issues, mental health or physical health, that prevents them from functioning independently?
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, I think that's a great question. I think what I'll do is I'll just say a few things first, and then hopefully we get some other responses. Because I'm actually also saying, okay, folks out there in webinar land, what is your response to that? What if you can't match someone because they have enough challenges that it prevents them from functioning independently? And I think that my first thought on that actually is, when we talk about preventing them from functioning independently, is that our only goal? Is to make sure that everyone is able to function independently. And I'm not sure from a Housing First perspective that is our only goal. I think there are going to be some people, and that's why they're sort of being provided supports through a Housing First philosophical lens, is because that ability to function independently or to the societal norm has been difficult for them already because of those things. And some individuals are going to need supports for the rest of their lives. And I think that's part of the goal also of prioritization and matching, and then providing supports, is to be able to identify who is going to need those kinds of intensive supports, and do we have the resources available? And so my first response, and this may sound a bit like a cop-out, but my first response to that is that tells me that those particular resources have not been brought to the table or are not available in your community. And therefore it's difficult to match someone to those resources if you don't have them. And so if you have a high number of individuals like that, then to me, that would help determine priority. That would help to determine the kinds of focus you need to put on program development, procurement of other kinds of housing resources, development of housing resources in your community. But we have to also remember that Housing First is a permanent supportive housing program. Even though it's based on providing supports to someone in their home, and it's not like necessarily a congregate type situation, it is potentially permanent supportive housing. And so a true Housing First program should be able to provide supports to people who have difficulty functioning independently, if they're providing enough intensive kinds of follow-up.
And Quinn's sorry, Wally, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and Quinn's just written in the chat pretty much what I was going to say, but when we set up priority, we're often looking at this from the placement of clients, and it isn't just that. It's about funding decisions, about system design. The whole process works almost circularly. As if you don't create a case for what you need by building that system, you can't get what you need. And so it really works off of itself when you have these priorities, and suddenly you start to see that the folks that you've prioritized are not getting housed because they don't have those supports in your community. And there are a number of communities on this call that I work with that are small communities, and they don't have much of anything. But in order to get what they need to be able to create the case to get what they need. And so this really works hand in hand with that.
I wonder if we unmute Nagina and have some discussion about this. If you're okay with that, Nagina. If you're not, quickly type in the chat and scream, no, stop. But we'd love to unmute you and let you talk further about that, because I think you had a follow-up comment.
You should be okay to talk now, Nagina.
Hi, Wally, Quinn, and Jody.
Hi.
Hi, it's good to join you today.
Great to have you.
Thank you. So really my question was quite a complicated question, because we see a lot of people and we're a small outreach center, but we do great work and everybody works really hard.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's so difficult to actually do this and match people, because like Jody said, we haven't done, or we don't have the resource to actually match people because we haven't had the time to put the case together or identified appropriately in terms of having the know-how around this issue. And I think in the pandemic, it's just made it obviously a bit more difficult now
Mm-hmm.
to do that.
So what do you do now in those situations?
Right now it's been difficult because we've been just providing people with food and packages and, you know, trying to get them. But I think it's going to get eventually very difficult, because in the past we've opened up, David, who I work with on the advocacy team, have actually worked to get the churches involved. And they've opened up their doors so that we could take in the homeless population in Mississauga, people who would access our services within our boundaries, so that they could get in from the cold and just have somewhere to stay overnight, and then they would leave. And we had all kinds of difficulties of setting that up, and also the fact that where just micro things like where would somebody put their belongings, you know, and then what happens after, you know, and if we can't reach them again, we don't know if they're safe or not, what happens. It's really difficult actually, and a lot of work, good work though, have to say.
I would venture to guess that there's a lot of folks on this call today that have experienced similar frustrations, where that sort of the meantime issue comes up. You know, if we can't match them, even if they're completely, you know, as I said, document ready or ready to be matched, if we don't have the appropriate place, or even if we don't have a place that's to their liking, sometimes that's part of the challenge too. But what happens in the meantime, and how do we support them when they're here, there, and every, like you've just explained? And you know, that's not an uncommon challenge. And you know, you can only do the best that you can do with the resources you have available to you. And I know in your area, like the region of Peel and the Peel Alliance and Homelessness have been working together with multiple other organizations in sort of working through coordinated access in that area. And based on what you understand from that, or what you don't understand from that, is what is the process that's been established for that now, or is there?
It's true. I think we could reach out to them. I think it would be good to actually work with, because we are a small outreach service. I think it'd be good to expand and work with others, and probably bring in some of the social capital and the way of working that's been established. I think we could certainly do that. I think that would be one of the ways to bring in that resource.
So then, if I understand you correctly, then up until now, your agency or your program hasn't necessarily been at that same table of where they're talking about the whole coordinated access process.
No, it's not.
Yeah. So I would definitely recommend that you reach out to them and just see how your organization can be brought into the fold there, because there's probably very likely services and resources that you have as well that could be very valuable for the entire system. And so I think you hit it bang on, is that by connecting and removing yourself from whatever silo you might be in, you might be able to find some of those options, right? And so you have resources that you bring to the table. The table already has resources that now then potentially become available to the folks that you're working with, if they're prepared to be assessed and put on that same priority list, right?
Yeah,
So,
I think it is a possibility. I think because we've been working independently, people access us more. I don't know how that would affect how the way, our clients would view that. It's always a tough decision, to go alone or go with others, because, you can lose the people that you've engaged. They can become disengaged. There's all these issues around trust for people and how they like to access certain services and not others. And I think, sorry, Jody, go ahead.
No, I don't want to cut in at all. But I think one of the things I wanted to say from what you're saying is it's a heavy burden to carry, to be the only person that person's accessing. And so widening out that scope of folks that they can turn to, and engaging with a variety of agencies that can also support someone, really is I think healthier for the individual and also healthier for the people in your agency. And I think that's something to really think about in terms of that coordination, to really just make sure that even on teams, that there's not just one person working with one client. It's so important.
Yeah, well, we do have,
yeah.
sorry, we do have people come in like we used to have when we were open, the nurse, accountants, helping with finance. We'd have an intake team. So the actual outreach center itself is it's very good actually in that sense. But in terms of outside services, and it's well supported by local counselors and people that are looking to help and be involved in terms of community as well. It has a great, rapport with the people in and around that area.
So Nagina, just so you know, in the chat, we've got both Rain and Daphne that have reached out to you and said, feel free to get a hold of them. So
thank you.
Look at this. You've already got, you've got a couple of ins there.
And that's how we do this.
Thank you. Sounds
good.
Good.
So thank you for coming on and sharing with us as well. We really appreciate that. So just to throw one of those questions out there again, what brought you folks that haven't talked yet? What brought you to this community of practice call today? Like, why did you want to come on here? Why is prioritization something that has given you enough interest that you felt you wanted to come and be part of this? Is it because you've got some challenges in your own prioritization development, or is it because you're just trying to gain an initial understanding? Share with us. Tell us who would be out there willing to kind of talk about that. And while we wait for people to respond, Quinn, I see that you posted something in the chat. I wonder if you want to say just a little bit about that.
Yeah, I just posted that prioritization is about ensuring the appropriate person gets connected to the appropriate intervention to help them resolve their homelessness. And one thing that you may find from a good priority list is that someone cannot be served by your particular program. I mean, it is a little bit Housing First 101 stuff when we talk about the difference between the intervention and the philosophy, but it's important. I think I always go back to that in trying to figure out some of these issues, because a housing first philosophy is very different from the housing first program necessarily. And there might be people that you encounter through this process, or that show up at your, doorstep, virtually or otherwise, that need a type of intervention that's not at the table right now, or that doesn't exist in your community. A priority list can be fantastic for those people to identify that there is a need in the community, or that person, or that the intervention that they need is not at your table. But it is important to identify that. That being said, I think that one thing that we all that work in this sector are in danger of is taking the weight of the entire cause on our shoulders. And we look in the eyes of a person who is reaching out to us for help, and there's something within us that wants desperately to help that person right now. And some of the things that I've just said can, I think, for some practitioners and some people in leadership, sound like, okay, great, but what about this guy? What about this person, the human being that's suffering in front of me? And I think that that is a completely valid response. And so the right now is a real concern. I maybe not concern, that's probably not the right term, but the right now is a real focus that needs to be dealt with, and it's often a lot messier than we want it to be. And I've definitely been in that situation on the front line. I've definitely been in that situation working with teams where occasionally you're doing the best you can for the person, knowing that for right now there's not another place for them.
Yeah.
I think one of the nice things about prioritization also is that it's a bit of a reset. And I think that what can happen in systems is that we get into a rhythm and we do things for 99 years that way. And when you ask people why you've done it that way for 99 years, they say, because we've always done it this way. And going through a process of systems mapping and doing prioritization really forces a community or forces a group of folks and agencies to take a look at what's happening and take a look at what's needed and assess whether or not the two match and make adjustments, because we can really get into a rhythm of doing it the same way we've always done it. And without measuring that and looking at it, it might not be that we're making any gains whatsoever.
Something
Sorry.
that came up for me as you were talking, Quinn, and I appreciate both of your comments there. Oh, before I go on, the link that you put in was just to the panelists. So if you're typing certain comments in, folks, remember you can choose whether you want that message to go to just the panelists or to everyone. But something that came up for me was around one of the challenges that comes with this development of a systems approach, and why prioritization sometimes doesn't work well in that approach. And that is because the individuals that are part of that system aren't necessarily part of the system, which means sometimes I think organizations have a tendency to let go of the overprotectiveness of their particular clientele.
Yeah.
And instead, in order for a systems approach to work effectively, you have to be able to instead view those people as your organization's participants and view them as system participants. This is the system's clients, not our clients. And we are all different agencies and organizations that are like a different spoke in the wheel or a cog in the machine that work together to make sure that the system participants can get the best supports that they need. And the best way to do that is to make sure that all system participants are pulled together and looked at together as an entire group. And that way we can prioritize from there. But you can't prioritize people from 3/4 of the system organizations and then have that other quarter of the organizations be saying, well, but we are only going to prioritize ours. And yes, sometimes, and then what happens if those clients are working with more than one organization? And so all of that starts to get in the mix and cause a real challenge. So it's really important that you have to kind of let go. You have to be prepared to let go and say, you know, we are going to serve our clients better by prioritizing all of them together, as opposed to us just trying to serve our own people.
I so agree with that, Wally. And I've been in the face of agencies in the past where when I hear, but our clients have trust issues and they don't trust other organizations. And I want to put it back to the agency and say, well, it sounds like you do too. Let's talk about this. If you are not willing to cheerlead and expand your client's horizons, what's that about? Is that about you or the client? We've got Tiffany here from Halton, and I would love to hear what she has to say as well.
Okay. And then once she's done, we have Catherine Watson, who has a question as well. So if they would both, you know, are open to speak, I'd rather Catherine ask her question live than us read it. But let's go to Tiffany first. Is she prepared to?
I'm here. I'm ready.
Yay,
Awesome.
Tiffany.
Hi, friends.
Go.
So I just wanted to share a little bit about why I'm listening on this call, because we've been, I would say, fully operational with our coordinated access and our by name list since January 2020. And I would say that things are going like very well. But the reason I'm here is because we don't really have any concrete policies and procedures. And Jody told me we needed some. No, I'm kidding. We do need some, because there is going to be this scenario where and I mean, to your point that, like, you know, it's great now until an executive director from the shelter leaves and everything could change, right? So it does make perfect sense. So that's sort of why I'm here, to get a sense of that. One thing I can speak to in terms of like identifying, you know, when there's a lack of housing opportunities for certain individuals, you know, when we've looked through our by name list, we're finding that it's sort of guiding the services we need. So first, we were able to see that we really had a service gap for seniors. We have a lot of homeless seniors that, you know, really required that LIN support. So we were able to finagle some funding to partner with Links to Care, which is an agency that sort of like a service navigator that will work in the support service sector as well as the health service sector to sort of bridge that gap for us, because that's certainly not our area of expertise. So we've brought them on, and that has just been so great. So they're able to tell us this is a long-term care client, this is a housing with related supports client, this is someone that can fully live independently, and we're able to coordinate the supports that way. We've also really seen that we have, you know, I'm sure this is like similar to a lot of areas, but, you know, lots of guys with, you know, really major mental health, but there's just not enough permanent supportive housing to go around. So we've sort of said, hey, like if we offer a housing allowance, we've connected with one of our mental health support agencies. If you guys provide the case management, we provide the housing allowance. And then we ask one of our other housing help guys to help find the housing. Can we all work together to keep these folks housed? So so we're in the midst of doing that. So we've just, you know, I feel like the by name list is kind of guiding telling us what our priorities are, and we're able to sort of finagle or try to be creative in housing our guys. That's all I have for you.
Mm-hmm. No, that's great. Thanks for sharing. And just as terms of you talked about people going into shelter and stuff, and again, a comment Nagina had made in the chat was, she said, we found a lot of those experiencing homelessness do not want to go into the shelters. And I think that's true. And so what that tells me, though, is that we can't rely solely on the shelters to be our access points. Yeah. To get onto the by name list and to be prioritized. So there has to be, and that's what when we talk about equitable service for all individuals, that's a key component of coordinated access. And so if you've got people that don't or won't go to the shelter, then you've got to have another route for them to be able to enter your coordinated access system. So anyways, thanks again, Tiffany. And Catherine, do you want to?
Sure.
Yeah, we have Catherine here. I'm told that before her question, she's going to sing us a little something.
You're so funny.
Well, that was Tiffany. That was Tiffany.
Oh, Tiffany was going to sing? I see. Okay. Well, I was singing in the car on the way home earlier this morning, so maybe I was practicing. I don't know. At any rate, I did just want to say too that here often people will say they may go to the shelter for food and programming, but a lot of by name list clients don't want to sleep there and will sleep just about anywhere else but there.
Mm-hmm.
So even outside in our cold Yukon weather. So.
Yeah.
Anyway, I had written in response to Wally's why question, and just to say, in Whitehorse, it's really exciting, but it's a bit frustrating too. I've only been involved with this for about a year, but I think the coordinated access process has been trying to get off the ground since around, I think 2017, maybe 2018, I'm not exactly sure. But it feels like finally we're at a kind of a launch point where things have all come together, and a lot of it is a COVID gift, which is a whole interesting perspective as well. But one of the things that I'm now involved in is that we have a 100 Homes campaign, which is through the Safe at Home organization. And the main focus, well, one of the main focuses is recruiting landlords. We also don't have a functional prioritizing process, but we're so close. We're so close. And those two reasons together are, I guess, why I really wanted to make sure I joined today. Because when I'm going to talk to landlords, it's like I can give all kinds of, or I can come up in my head with all kinds of reasons why it would be a benefit for them to join. But then I look and I go, oh, but we actually don't have a process to match your unit with an appropriate client. So it's a bit of a chicken and an egg thing, and we really do have, and I'm sure everyone does, but we are so desperately short of units, it's ridiculous. But we also don't have that process. So although I'm commenting and sounding a bit frustrated, perhaps, I'm actually really excited about the way things are coming together. I suspect it's going to be a little bit messy, but that's how change is. And yeah, it's all good. At the end of my comment, I also had said, someone had said, or it was on one of the slides, about the need to have a resource list. In my sort of combing through ideas for where to find housing, this comment struck home because I suspect that we have a lot more units that are publicly supported, whether it's group homes or other types of buildings that have some kind of public resource behind them, that aren't anywhere near our coordinated access or by name list. So things to work on.
Yeah.
So I don't really have a question. I guess it was more of a, you said why, Wally, so I said, here's why.
Well, and your response has prompted another question for me, and as well as a comment. And you know, and I'll start with what you said at the end here about a resource list. And I think that even though it seems like a simple thing, there's a lot of communities that don't do that, that don't actually write down what resources are actually being made available to this coordinated access table and what are formally committed. And in addition, what other resources are out there? Not saying you have to commit them to it, but what resources are out there, because that almost gives you this ability to go, okay, well, if there are resources there, but they're not at the table, and we have this many people in our coordinated access system, this is why we're facing the challenge we're facing. And at the very least, that picture gives your community an opportunity to be real with themselves, you know, and go, oh, okay, so you're saying that if there was some additional resources like what we have, that might make a difference. And so it just gets people to be honest about what their involvement in the system is and so forth. And the other comment I was going to make is about you're saying, you know, you've got this kind of chicken and the egg thing going on, or I would actually call it more of a push me, pull you, if anybody knows what a push me, pull you is.
I do.
Okay, good. And I think sometimes those kinds of situations paralyze people. And I would say, don't wait for the housing resources to be available to create your process. Create your process. Who cares? Create it. And that way you've got something ready, right? For when they come. It's that common statement of imperfect action trumps perfect planning. So let's put it together. If it's not right when we're able to implement it, oh well, but at least we've got it started. Now, the question that I have is, what do you think has made it challenging? What has made it challenging for your community to develop that prioritization process? You said you're almost there, but what's kind of been the hiccups?
I can only speak to what I've seen in the year that I've been here. So I started, we had a by name list administrator person who ended up taking on also the intake part. And it was too much. There just wasn't enough staff time to be able to do a good job. There are other factors as well, but from my perspective, one of the things that has significantly changed in the last few months is that we now have a dedicated coordinated access coordinator who's looking at, she's got a policy handbook now that's just being finalized. She's taking on the chat group, doing all kinds of things around coordination of that overall coordinated access. We also have a by name list administrative person who's like, they're not frontline, they're dedicated to the administration part of the by name list. Both of those are new positions, and were trying to be done before by people who also were doing frontline. So it was just too much. And I think now with having those things, having some new people, not that the people who were there previously were doing a poor job at all, by no means. But sometimes just a change in the mix of staff makes a difference. And yeah, sorry, that could go down another path there, but it's just the people and the roles have all come together, and the people who are no longer with this in the same roles have, some of them we're connected with in other ways, and it's better all around, better for everyone. So there are, like I say, there are other issues, but I don't know the details enough to comment on them. But I feel like those things, as well as the COVID money that's come available to make some of these other, like the 100 Homes campaign, give all of that a little bit of a boost. So,
yeah. Thanks, Catherine. Appreciate that. Appreciate you responding. And you know what Catherine was talking about sort of speaks to the last question that we have here from Thomas Jones. And I'm sorry, Thomas, we don't have time to put you live and go over it, but I will say just a couple things as we end here in relation to that. And Catherine kind of spoke to it, and that is that I think, first of all, it's important that you have someone or an organization or a set of people that play the role of coordinating the process. So you've got someone who is kind of leading the development and the maintenance of the coordinated process, which involves all of those names, the by name list and the priority list and all of that stuff. But I don't think one person acts as a gatekeeper, as you asked. I think that the process is the gatekeeper, and everyone who is committed to that process that has been developed by your community as a whole or by your system together and through consensus, that formulates how the gatekeeping is done in that list. But there does need to be someone in a role, as Catherine talked about, or an organization that plays that role of kind of leading the system development and monitoring and things like that. But you've got to spend time and develop a specific process for how you manage, and policies for how you manage that list of names and how you prioritize that list of names. So I hope that kind of speaks to your question. I would recommend for people, there are lots of resources. All of our TTA and Built for Zero resources regarding coordinated access, you can find in the Built for Zero website under coordinated access. And maybe Quinn, if you want to just type that into the chat too. But you can go there under coordinated access and you can find things associated with what we've talked about. The question was, do you have an operational model or framework? There's examples of all of that in there. Lots of different resources. And then of course, we would be happy to speak to anybody further about any of these things. Yeah. So I just want to take a second and as I sort of share the last slide here, which is just thank you, and contact information for myself, or go to our website at training.cah.ca and you can send us a request for information or whatever, and there's our social media stuff. Thank you so much for attending and listening and sharing your comments and thoughts. We love that, and we want to continue this opportunity to share. So please feel free to join us. You will see on the webinar link other webinars that are coming up as well, so feel free to register for those. Otherwise, it's 1:03. Quinn, Jody, do you have any last words to say?
4:03.
Yeah, no, it's 1:03. Otherwise, the recommendation was made when we talked about singing Christmas songs. So if I don't see you guys before, I'll just say, have yourself a merry little Christmas. And on that note, over and out.
Thank you guys.
Good
to see everyone. Take care.